the Bourbon dynasty we already talked about in with the French Revolution. We're going to look today at the fall of the Romanov dynasty, which begins not under Peter the Great. It begins under Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV, but Peter the Great, who we've already looked at, becomes the main figurehead of the Romanov dynasty. He's the one that changes Muscovy into Russia. He's the one that builds St. Petersburg, not named after himself, named after St. Peter, which is why it's called St. Petersburg. But he is the one that really puts Russia on the map as a European power, changes the dynamic of the European power politics and so on and so forth. And the Romanov dynasty will remain in power in Russia from the late 1500s all the way until 1917. And in 1917, the Russian Revolution, which happens during the context of World War II, the Russian Revolution will lead to the fall of the Romanovs, the rise of the Bolsheviks, and ultimately the rise of Joseph Stalin, who we're going to look at tomorrow. We're going to spend the last 2 days of the course, sort of course content days, which is tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday. We're going to look at Joseph Stalin tomorrow and the Russian, not the Russian Revolution, we'll do that today, but we'll look at Joseph Stalin and his legacy tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we will look at Adolf Hitler, rise of fascism. We'll look at the appeal of fascism and why it is that Hitler comes into power. We'll delve a bit into the Holocaust, but a lot of you have done the Holocaust in grade 11 with the genocide course and grade 10 with the Canadian history course. So we'll do some stuff on that, but what we're going to be focusing in mostly on in the next 2 days is the mindset, the psychology of arguably the two greatest mass murderers of the 20th century, Hitler and Stalin. We're going to exclude people like Mao Zedong and Pol Pot out of that list, and we're just going to look at these two big guys because of the timing, who both rise to power in Europe, in the map behind me, and who bring the world to the culmination of the most horrific, bloodiest, catastrophic war in human history, the Second World War, with its 50 million dead and entire nations and continents laid to ruin and so on and so forth. All of that comes as a result of Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler's perpetual enmity towards one another. So before we can get to that, tomorrow and Thursday, then what we need to do today is look at the Russian Revolution and look at the fall of the Romanovs. By the way, as anybody who's taken a course with me already knows, the last day of school, Friday, which is the last day of our course, because I've said to you clearly a number of times, I've said to you that Friday is, you got to get your stuff in by Friday. I'm putting your marks into the computer on Monday. And a number of you yesterday did not take my advice and did not reach out to me yesterday and discuss what's going on. There are still some of you that have not handed in any of the summative assignments. A couple of you still owe me 4. A number of you, a good number of you, owe me at least 3. So there's very few of you that are down to just owing me 1 assignment, which means you're all under the gun to get that stuff done. You've got to get it done if you want the credit. So again, I'll have an optional Google Meet today. If you are one of the people that owes me all 5, or you owe me 4, or you owe me 3, if you don't have a solid game plan, you best get on that Google Meet today and start talking to me about what your plans are for trying to get that stuff done, because we only have until Friday. With all that in mind, Friday, there will be no new content given out on Friday. Friday is a 8-hour blitz. All you work on your assignments. I will be here. I'll do a Google Meet in the morning, entirely optional. I'll do a Google Meet in the afternoon, entirely optional, with attendance questions. I'll be reaching out to those students who have not yet reached out to me about the fact that things are not done, saying, what's the plan? Because the clock is ticking, tick, 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 about getting stuff done. So Friday will be get caught up on workday. If you have all your work done by Friday, then congratulations. You get a bonus day just to relax and enjoy yourself. Most of you are not in that position yet, so I imagine most of you are still going to be needing to use Friday to get caught up and finish off all your work, but that's the way Friday is going to be. So today, Russian Revolution. Tomorrow, Joseph Stalin. Thursday, Adolf Hitler. Friday, get caught up, submit all your work, and go from there. Okay. All right, folks. Let's look at some context from the First World War, and we talked yesterday about the causes of the war, why the war erupts, how the war erupts, etc. What we want to focus in on today, though, is really the Russian Revolution and how all this comes about. And I'm going to give you context for the Russian Revolution today. I'm going to bring you up to the fall of the Romanov dynasty in 1918, 1917, and then what I'm going to do is we'll wrap up the Google Meet. And give you a little bit of a mental break so you can go and stretch your legs and so on. And then I'm going to link a documentary, as I said to you in my outline for the day, link to a documentary, really good documentary that comes out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991. I was in history class in 1991 in my last year of high school. And in this very course, in fact, it used to be called Western Civilization, Modern Western Civilization is what this course used to be called. Now it's called The West and the World. And in that class, I forget what my teacher's name is, but she came rolling in with the big tube TV on a cart, and we always knew that was a good day because videos were going on or something exciting was happening. We didn't have to listen to as you guys have to listen to me up here at the front going history. It was a video. It was going to be a good video. And what we did was we were sitting there. She plugged in the TV, adjusted the rabbit ear antennas on the TV, and we watched live as the Soviet Union collapsed. There have been a number of moments in my life that I've watched the world change in an instant on television. I'm sure there have been some for you as well, but I had the same opportunity for my students later on in 2001. We were sitting here in class in 2001, and I said, "Well, stop. We're not talking about what we're talking about anymore." Flipped on the TV because we had a TV at that point, and they actually had cable running through the school. We could get cable TV in here, and watch the World Trade Center's towers come down, and watch the world change in an instant that way as well. We all have these moments, right, where the world changes. I watched the Soviet Union collapse in 1991, which is really interesting, and the documentary that I'm going to link for you today sort of starts with the fall of the Soviet Union and the opening up of freedoms, the opening up of the ability of people not to be afraid of the KGB, not to be afraid of their own government anymore, but to begin to question openly and publicly, begin to question the last 80 years of Soviet history, since 1917 all the way through the 1991. As soon as Lenin comes in, Lenin follows the playbook that we've already set out, that Napoleon uses, that Henry VIII used, that all dictators use, that Hitler will use as well. You immediately ban all of the political parties. You ban freedom of the press and freedom of speech to control what people are allowed to say and what they're allowed to hear. And you create a secret police force under Lenin. It was the Cheka, which became the NKVD, which became the KGB, which is now the FSB in Russia. And you hunt down and eliminate your political opponents. So Lenin kicks right into dictatorship 101 in 1918. And Stalin, of course, accelerates that on steroids in the 1930s and 40s with the great purges and the mass murders that he commits. But people are terrified of the government for 80 years. They don't ask questions. They don't investigate their own past for fear of being denounced to the police, for fear of being brought to the attention of the authorities. And so for 80 years, people had known that there used to be a Tsar of Russia. There used to be Tsar Nicholas II and Alexandra, and their 5 children, Olga, Maria, Tatiana, Anastasia, and Alexei. But nobody knew what had happened to them. There's all kinds of propaganda about what had happened to them. There's all kinds of rumors about what had happened to them. But nobody really knew what happened to the Romanov family. The West knew that the Bolsheviks had killed them in 1918. So spoiler alert on the documentary. It's not actually. That they say that right at the very beginning, that the Romanov family is murdered by by the Bolsheviks. For much the same reason, by the way, much the same reason as what happened with Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Why does Robespierre want Louis XVI killed? If he's still alive, he will always be a halcyon beacon back to a different time. He'll be an option for a different style of government. He'll be a way to roll back the clock and roll back the reforms that Maximilien Robespierre wants to bring in under the blade of the guillotine, and what Lenin wants to bring in at the point of a bayonet and machine guns. You'll always have the option of going back. But if you murder the king, if you murder the Tsar, there is no way to go back. You've burned that bridge. You have to move forward with your massive revolution, with your completely overhauling of society. So the Bolsheviks murder the Tsar and the Tsarina and the Tsarevich and the rest of the girls in order to bring into effect, in order to move forward in their civil war between the Reds and the Whites and building of a communist utopia and so on. But with the fall of the Russian Soviet state in 1991, people begin asking questions and say, okay, well, we can now look back, we can now recognize that we had a monarchy prior to the Russian Revolution. They begin to, put up paintings of Tsar Alexander again. They bring out statues of Tsar Alexander again, and all those things that have been banned for 80 years. But the big question that still haunts people is, well, where are they? Because we know that they were killed, but we don't know where they are. And so what the documentary is about is it takes you all the way back to 1917 and intersperses it with people from the 1950s that were investigating it, police officers in the 1970s, 1980s who were quietly under the radar investigating it, and it takes you on a detective hunt looking for the remains of Russia's last Tsar. So it's kind of a cool documentary that goes through all that, and there'll be a Google question that I want you to do in response to looking at that, tying together the Russian Revolution with the French Revolution, and again, one of these big overall ideas in history, these big questions in history. So that's the plan for today, for tomorrow, for Thursday, and for Friday. All right, let's go back to 1914 and let's talk about the Schlieffen Plan. Casting our minds back to grade 10. With the Schlieffen Plan, remember, we talked about the fact that Germany now, after the ending of the Three Emperors League, I apologize, the Three Emperors League, and with the end of the reinsurance treaty, Russia over here is no longer allied with Germany and Austria and Italy. So Russia is now off on its own. At the same time, because Bismarck has been trying for the better part of 25 years to isolate France diplomatically from everybody else, France is also alone. So as we talked about in 1895, you've got the creation of the Franco-Russian Entente. France allies itself with Russia, combined against their common mutual enemy, which is Germany. And why is it a mutual enemy? Because Germany snubs both those countries. The creation of the Franco-Russian Entente now makes it inevitable that if there's going to be a war on the continent, then there's going to be a war between Germany and Russia and France on both fronts at the same time. So I keep getting distracted because there's all kinds of workers that are going in and out here, and it's just my ADHD is bad anyway. But then I see all this stuff going on out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, it's happening over there, and they're carrying in wood, and they're bringing in steel beams, and they're carrying out detritus. Some guy walked in with a whole bunch of coffees just now. I'm hoping one's for me. I'm going to guess it's not. Like, I'm entertaining them with this kind of story. My windows are open. They can hear the lecture. I even had a couple guys out there the other day. They were just sitting there listening to what I was talking about. And they were cocking their ears and listening to what we were discussing. They're getting this for free. Where's my coffee? Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Germany now is going to have to fight Russia and France at the same time. So the Schlieffen Plan is created. We talked about this, to bring the German forces through France first, knock out the French, and then use the German railway network and bring all of their forces back and hit the Russians. Now, all of this is based upon a couple of different things. One, that the Germans think they can beat the French in 6 weeks. Why? Because the last time they fought them in 1870, they beat them in 6 weeks. Has the French military gotten bigger since 1870? Sure, it's doubled in size. It's about 850,000 troops from around 390,000 troops in 1870. But the German army has also doubled in size from around 400,000 to around 870,000. So they've kept pace with one another. So all things being equal, if the Germans beat the French in 1870 in 6 weeks, the Germans can beat the French in 1914 in 6 weeks. It makes sense, according to their planning. As well, Russia has not, this is important for our story today, Russia has not gone through any of the major changes that are happening in Europe. So all the things from the very beginning of our course, from the Renaissance to the Reformation, to the Scientific Revolution, to the Enlightenment, all of those concepts affect continental Europe, but they don't really impact Russia. And the reason why they don't impact Russia is because Russia, until Peter the Great, doesn't start to bring all those ideas into Russia. And what we saw in our course is that in a very short period of time, in 25 years, Peter the Great goes through the Reformation, Scientific Revolution, and Enlightenment and brings all of this stuff into his country, completely revolutionizes the country in a very, very short period of time. Russia tends to do this over time, where they'll accelerate and then they'll lag, and then they'll accelerate and then they'll lag. And part of that has to do with their geography, part of that has to do with the sheer size of it. A lot of the times, even though Russia does have a European capital with St. Petersburg, they also still have their what we would call Eastern European or Asiatic capital, which is Moscow. And it, again, with the onion domes and so on and so forth, it's very much more aligned with Russia's previous interests in the East than it is with Russia's new interests in the West. So Russia tends to stagnate over time. But what revolutionizes Europe in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, after the Enlightenment, of course, is Napoleon. Napoleon comes through, conquers every country in Europe, brings with him then the Napoleonic Code, brings with him the end of serfdom, brings with him the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution is a direct outgrowth of the Napoleonic Wars. Think about the fact that because of the size, the sheer size of the armies that are fighting in the 1800s under Napoleon, you have a necessity to create industrialized warfare. Put this into context for you. In, sorry, just going to do that. In no, let's go back. 1760, 59. You have the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in Canada. During the 7 Years' War, one of the biggest, most climactic, most impactful battles in Canadian history happens at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. General Wolfe versus General Montcalm, the British versus the French for the control of all of French Canada. What happens? The British defeat the French. France then loses Canada to the British Empire. We become part of the British Empire, and on we go from there. Our history changes. The world changes in many ways, shapes, and forms. That battle was between 3,000 French troops on one side, 2,500 British troops on the other side. It was over in 20 minutes. Like that. That battle is over. Fast forward 40 years to Napoleon's invasion of Russia, and you've got Napoleon invading Russia not with 6,000 troops, not with 60,000 troops, but with 600,000 troops, and with 15,000 horses and 4,000 cannons. It's one thing to make by hand guns and swords and boots and uniforms and hats and belts and buckles and whatever for 2,000 people or 3,000 people. You cannot mass produce by hand, which is literally what manufacturing means, but you can't produce by hand enough for 600,000 guys in a short period of time, unless you industrialize the process of making your weaponry, industrialize the process of making your uniforms. So what the French do is they begin to mass produce uniforms, mass produce guns, mass produce all their stuff. In order to keep pace then, the British have to industrialize in order to mass produce their uniforms and their guns and their boots, as do the Austrians, as do the Italians, and so on and so forth. The only country that doesn't need to do that is Russia, because Russia is not conquered by Napoleon. So Russia is not conquered by Napoleon. And I know some of you might say, yeah, but England's not conquered by Napoleon either. True. Good point. But the English fight in every major coalition against Napoleon. The English are throwing everything they've got against Napoleon to try and defeat him, because he's the biggest existential threat to their existence and their empire and so on. So they're involved all the way along. They involve themselves with ground troops. The Russians don't get involved in every coalition. The Russians are only involved in 4 of the 6 coalitions against Napoleon. Britain's involved in all of them. So there's a difference with the British as opposed to the Russians. The Russians don't industrialize in the late 1700s, early 1800s, like the Europeans do. The Russians are also not conquered by Napoleon. So in Russia, you still have serfdom. In Russia, you still have like a feudal mentality. So if a Russian from 1880 were to go into 1680 Germany, he'd understand how the legal system worked. He'd understand how all the concepts worked and so on and so forth. On the flip side, you take a 1680s German noble and you bring him forward to 1880s Germany, he'd have no idea what was going on. It would be completely foreign to him, but he'd feel very comfortable in Russia, because the feudal system of the Middle Ages still exists in Russia, because the Napoleonic Code doesn't extend all the way to Russia. Fast forward then to the time that we get to the Schlieffen Plan and getting ready for World War I. France is an industrialized nation. Germany is an industrialized nation. Russia, not an industrialized nation. So it's going to take the French less time to mobilize than it will take the Russians. It's going to take the French less time to put men into the field than it will take the Russians. The French are going to have more guns, the Russians will have fewer guns, et cetera, et cetera. So the Germans are not terribly afraid of the Russians in 1914 or 1902 when the Schlieffen Plan is created. They're less concerned with Russia, figuring that best case scenario, it'll take Russia 8 weeks to mobilize. More likely 10 to 12 weeks, more likely like 2 to 3 months to get ready to go to war. Whereas the Germans, at the drop of a hat, they're ready to rock and roll. So are the French. So the Schlieffen Plan calls for swing through, attack Paris, knock them out of the war first, then bring all your troops across. This is 6 weeks. Transport them across. That's 1 week. You're here in 7 weeks. You're still before the 8-week margin. You're ready to go. And then you can fight the Russians as time goes on. In the event, in 1914, when the war breaks out, the French, who are already under the gun when the war begins, the French, it doesn't start well for them. The war doesn't start well for the French. They're saved by a couple things. They're saved by the fact that the Belgians hold the German army off longer than anyone had anticipated. Germans figure 3 days to get through Belgium, takes them 7 to get through Belgium. On top of that, the British immediately deploy a what's called the British Expeditionary Force, a ground army, which comes into Belgium and forces the Germans to delay and to move some of their forces north to hold off the British attack to their north flank. And on top of that, the German army is not at the size it needed to be in 1914. They were supposed to have 10 divisions. They only have 8 divisions ready to go in 1914, because they really weren't anticipating a war in 1914. Nobody was. Anyway, as the war starts badly for the French immediately communicate to the Russians saying, hey, you guys, you got to deal with us. You got a treaty with us that goes all the way back to 1895 that we said that we're in this together against the Germans. The Germans have now attacked us. We want you involved in the war. And if you don't get involved in the war, then we're not going to help you out if the Russians or if the Germans come after you. Tsar Nicholas II says, okay, fine, we're not ready to go yet. I mean, we haven't got any troops. We haven't got railroad tracks. We barely got roads here in Russia. We're going to need some time. But he does have his own personal bodyguard, which is 100,000 well-trained troops. And he deploys that bodyguard to attack a city in Germany. And he gives them very, very explicit instructions. Go there, attack the city, like shell the city and so on, make a big noise and go, ah, Russians are here, and then bail, because I'm not losing you guys. You're the only army we've got right now. I don't want you to get fully engaged in the war, but I want you to go there, show the French that we're involved. We can snap some pics, fire them off, tell them that we're engaged and we're doing our thing. So the Russian forces come across and they attack this city right here, which is to the east of present-day Danzig or Gdansk in Poland. If anybody remember from grade 10, the Polish corridor, and that was one of the things that trips up everybody in 1939. That's what leads to World War II, is Hitler going into the Polish corridor to reunite Eastern Prussia and the rest of Nazi Germany. To the east of the city of Gdansk, right here, you've got the city of Königsberg. And Königsberg is translates to the King's City. Königsberg is the ancestral home of the Hohenzollern family. That's where Kaiser Wilhelm II's mommy lives. The Russians go and attack that city, shell the city, and then bolt. Immediately a cable gets sent from Königsberg to Berlin saying that the city's under attack. And Kaiser Wilhelm II is like, Mom! And sends a cable out to Erich von Falkenhayn, who is the leader of his forces, who are now going forward as part of the Schlieffen plan. They're here into Belgium, they're here into France, they're fighting against the British. The Battle of Mons has already happened. They're fighting against the French. Kaiser Wilhelm sends a cable to Erich von Falkenhayn saying the Russians are attacking already. And Erich von Falkenhayn says that's impossible. There's no way they can be attacking at this point. Mr. Peters, everybody. Oh, social distance. So thank you, Mr. Peters. Just brought me a coffee. See, he brings me a coffee. These guys don't bring me anything. I'm not pointing to you, Mommy. You're fine. I'm pointing to them. Says it's impossible. There's no way that the Russians are there. Kaiser Wilhelm II is like, are you calling my mom a liar? Are you? You calling her a liar? Because she's telling me that she's being attacked right now. He's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, I'm not. Your mom's fine. I like her. She's a nice lady. Makes great cake. Kaiser Wilhelm II says you have to go back and deal with the Russians. So Falkenhayn, against his own best interests, takes half of the German army that is now pounding its way through Belgium and France. Its advance has been slowed, but they are still making an inexorable advance on France. Half of the forces, 4 full divisions, 400,000 men are pulled off the attack, put onto the trains, and sent back here to deal with a non-existent threat on the German-Russian border. When they arrive there, what they find is no Russian troops. Well, they don't just stop there, though. They're at war with the Russians. They're already there, so they just pound their way right into Russia. And by the time the Russian army gets itself organized, gets itself mobilized, is able to mount a reasonable defense, the German army has punched all the way. So here's the border, okay, prior to World War I. Here is the border, present-day part of Lithuania, and then down into part of present-day Poland. This is the German-Russian border right here, around the city of Warsaw. From Warsaw all the way to there, the Russians are pushed back. They are pushed back 1,200 miles. Put that into kilometers for you. That's from here to Toronto and back 16 times. That's how far the Germans push into Russian territory before the Russians are able to actually stabilize the front and stop the German advance. The war has not started well for the Russians. On top of that, because they have no real industrial capacity, fully half of the Russian soldiers engaged in World War I either go into battle without guns, without shoes, without enough food, without enough supplies. It is an absolute disaster of epic proportions in 1914 and 1915. Okay, now, Russians lose their first major battle, lose their second major battle, lose their third major battle, and they start losing men by the hundreds of thousands into the millions. Russia, to put this into context for you, will, of all the forces in World War I, sorry, and World War II actually, but of all the armies in World War I, Russia will suffer the greatest number of casualties. The Russians will suffer approximately 94% casualties, 93% casualties in World War I, which means out of every 10 guys mobilized to fight, 9.5 of them are dead or wounded or captured or missing come 1917. And to give further weight to that number, Russia pulls out of the war in 1917. So they only fight 3 of the 4 years, and yet they still suffer more casualties. 12 million casualties are suffered by the Russians. Fully 5 million dead, 7 million wounded or killed in 3 years. That's millions of families who are grieving the loss of a father or a son or a brother or a husband. That's millions of families who've lost the breadwinner, who've lost the person that can put the food on the table, that can work the fields, can work on the mines, can do whatever. So you've got millions of families in grief, millions of families that are now pushed into poverty, millions of families that are suffering real starvation and real issues at home in Russia. How does this relate to the Tsar? Because 1914, lose a battle, lose a battle, lose a battle, lose a battle. 1915, lose a battle, lose a battle. Tsar Nicholas II, his only recourse when they lose these battles is to fire the general who's in charge. So after the first battle, the Battle of Brusilov, he fires his general. After the next battle, he fires the general. After the next battle, he fires the general. Eventually, what happens is, in 1915, Tsar Nicholas II, angry at all of his various generals for failing him, for not doing what he wants them to do, takes personal command of the army and goes out into the field. That's bad for 2 reasons. One, he always had plausible deniability when he wasn't in charge. Let's think back to Queen Elizabeth I. And I said one of the great things about Queen Elizabeth I was that she used the Privy Council. She used all these nobles, Sussex and Leeds and York, etc. She used all of these nobles to run all the major branches of the government, the economy and warfare and so on. If things went well, she got the credit. If things went badly, she blamed the noble and replaced the noble. She always had plausible deniability and said, well, if something went wrong, that wasn't my fault. But I'm taking action. I'm fixing the problem. I'm getting rid of the guy. When Tsar Nicholas II takes control of the army, he can no longer blame anybody else for any failures. And from that point forward, in early 1915, every Russian soldier that dies, technically, is his fault. Every Russian soldier who gets trench foot or who gets injured, who goes missing or gets captured, it's his fault, which means millions of people now personally blame the Tsar for the fact that their dad or their brother or their son or their husband is gone. He was generally well liked prior to the war, but just like Louis XVI makes a mistake of getting involved in the American Revolution, which bankrupts France, leading and brings the ideas of the American Revolution to France, Nicholas II's decision to get involved in World War I accelerates the downfall of the Romanov dynasty because he is now blamed personally by all these people for the loss of all their family members. To make matters worse, when Tsar Nicholas II leaves Moscow and goes to the front, he leaves Russia under the control of his wife, Alexandra, who is a German-born princess, and the Russian people don't like her. They don't like her because she's a foreigner. They don't like her because they're at war with Germany. Let's harken back to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. The French people hate Marie Antoinette because she's a foreigner. They hate her even more after 1792 because it's her brother, Joseph II, who's in charge of the Austrian army, who is invading France in 1792. How can we trust this Austrian queen to have France's interests at the core of who she is when her brother is coming here and killing French people? The same thing happens in 1915. The German-born princess, who is now the Tsarina of Russia, is in charge of a country who is at war with her cousin. Tsar Nicholas II and Kaiser Wilhelm II are cousins. They're good friends. 1913 and in previous years before that, the two of them used to get together and go yachting all summer. For like weeks, the Russian royal family and the German royal family, the Romanovs and the Hohenzollerns would get together and go yachting. in the Black Sea or in the Baltic Sea or whatever. They were relatively close friends until World War I happens. Well, how can we expect the Tsarina to actively prosecute the war against her cousin? How can we expect the Tsar, who's off there at the front fighting against his good friend who he used to go boating with all the time? There's a lot of mistrust. And on top of that, to make matters even worse, the Tsarina is viewed very much as being under the influence of Grigory Rasputin. And Grigory Rasputin, also known as the Mad Monk, has been a fixture at the Russian court since about 1911. And he is a repulsive, odious, disgusting pervert of an individual. He really is. That's about as nice as I can summarize Grigory Rasputin. He is a drunk. He is reputed to have had sexual relations with the vast majority of the Russian court. It's rumored, not proven, but it's rumored that he sexually abused the Tsar's daughters when he was there at the court. If you see a picture of Grigory Rasputin, he is absolutely hideous and repulsive. Give me one quick second. Grigory Rasputin. Find a good image. There we go. Images of Rasputin. Let's share this. Oh, share. Share a tab. There we go. So here's Rasputin. You can see him, bit of a freak show. Like that's open image, new tab. That is a scary looking guy. And Rasputin is at the Russian court all of the time. He's always there. There's Rasputin. There's this image. Here's Rasputin with a bunch of Russian nobles and so on and so forth. Freaky. He is a freaky looking guy who is reputed to have done all kinds of really nasty sexual things. Police reports say at one point he went into a restaurant and bared his sexual organs to the patrons. Went around giving notes to the band and so on. Just a creepy dude. Now he's at the court all the time. He is always with the Tsarina all the time. And people, justifiably so, sit there and think, what is going on with this perv that's hanging out with the Tsarina? And why is the Tsar letting this happen? It's important to note, okay? There's some backstory on this, which is, and this comes from the fact that the Tsarina, Alexandra, is the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. By the way, all the major belligerents in World War I, England, France, Italy, Belgium, Germany, Russia, all of the royal households of Europe are all related to Queen Victoria. So really what World War I is a really big family feud between all these extended cousins, first cousins and second cousins and so on. The King of England is the uncle of the Tsar, the uncle of of Kaiser Wilhelm, once removed. And as I said, Kaiser Wilhelm is cousins with Tsar Nicholas II. They're both related to King Leopold of Belgium, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a great picture, actually, by the way, of Queen Victoria's silver anniversary in 1901, where Queen Victoria is sitting in the middle of this big family gathering, looking all dour and angry and sour and so on. And all around her are all the members of the European royal families, all going with their grandmother, who are all going to be at war with one another in 1914 when World War I breaks out. Anyway, it's important to know that the Tsarina is related to Queen Victoria because through Queen Victoria's family, and what runs in Queen Victoria's family is hemophilia. Hemophilia is the inability of the body to create blood clots. And we don't want blood clots, right, going through our veins and so on, but you need your blood to be able to clot because that's what stops your blood from just pouring out of your body when you get an injury. So when you cut your hand and it begins to bleed, eventually the blood slows down and stops bleeding. You put a Band-Aid on that, the blood stops bleeding. Because what happens is the blood will clot and will form a barrier to the blood continually pouring out, and you won't bleed to death. If you have hemophilia, your blood doesn't clot, or doesn't clot as effectively, and so you can die. You can die of a bad fall off of a horse if you bruise yourself internally. Bruising, when you get bruising on your skin, what that is blood underneath your skin that pools. And that's why it turns, you know, bluish, and then it turns black as the blood breaks down and so on, and then it turns yellow because that's the pigments that's left in the blood. Well, if you have hemophilia, a bad internal bleed, a bad internal bruise can lead to you bleeding to death internally. You could almost literally die of a bad paper cut if you have hemophilia. Now, women carry hemophilia, but women don't exhibit hemophilia. Women pass it down, though, to their male offspring. So if a woman has hemophilia in her family, she will pass it down to her daughters, who might pass it down to their sons, but they won't have hemophilia. But if they have a son, that son will potentially have hemophilia. Tsarina Alexandra has given hemophilia to her only son, Alexei, the Tsarevich, the heir to the throne. Now, why does that matter? It matters because the Russian royal family is not unaware or unafraid of potential assassinations. In fact, the Tsar's grandfather, Alexander, had been assassinated by a terrorist in the 1870s. There have been several assassination attempts on Nicholas II's father, and there have been various assassination plots against Nicholas II himself. Now, Nicholas doesn't have hemophilia, but his son does. And if word got out that you could kill the heir to the throne with a paper cut, that would be a field day for potential assassins. So it's a very, very top secret, hush hush. Nobody discusses the fact. Nobody even knows, aside from a few trusted doctors and so on, that the Tsarevich has got hemophilia. Anyway, work our way back in the story a little bit. 1908, 1909, the Tsarevich has a bad fall, takes a really bad spill, as little boys are wont to do, and begins bleeding internally. As he begins to bleed internally, his life, his vital signs begin to fade. He develops a very, very, very bad fever, slips in and out of a coma. He is on the verge of dying. All the doctors have done everything they can do. There's no cure at that point for hemophilia. Nothing they can do. They've done everything they can. All they can do at that point is pray. Now, the Tsarina is a very, very religious woman. And one of her maids in waiting takes this opportunity, knowing that the boy is on his deathbed, braves, the wrath of the Tsarina, braves the barrier between their stations, and says to her, I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but there is a faith healer who lives in Siberia who cures people, and there's all kinds of stories about him. That he can any people that are dying that nobody can save, this guy can save through faith healing. Well, the Tsarina, as any mother is wont to do when their child is on the verge of death, clings at any straw she can to try and keep her young boy alive. She reaches out to this faith healer, Grigory Rasputin. And Rasputin cables back to her from Siberia and says, don't worry, the boy won't die. And that night, his fever breaks, he comes out of his coma, starts to recover. Tsarina, who believes strongly in God, believes strongly that Grigory is a man of faith as a result of this, brings Rasputin to Moscow and to St. Petersburg to be with the family. And he is there in case the boy has another bad fall, because he's the only guy that could save Alexei. Now, why did Alexei recover? We don't know. I mean, if you believe in faith healing, it was a faith healing. If you believe in God, then maybe God saved the boy. If you believe in random acts of medical miracles, then it was a random act of medical miracle. But the Tsarevich, or the Tsarina, believes intently, devoutly in Rasputin's holiness and healing power. And that's why he's there. But the people don't know that. They don't know why Rasputin is there because they can't know that the boy's got hemophilia, because if they know that, then it could lead to a possible assassination attempt, and that puts the boy's life in danger. So the Tsarina puts up with all the jeers and the jibes and the snide comments about this pervert who's hanging around all the time. And everybody else, because people we do this, right? We go to the most, like Occam's razor, the most obvious answer is most likely the right one. They don't know the real reason he's there. They just figure, well, he's probably stooping the Tsarina and her daughters and the guy, they're all perverts and who knows. And so this whole spiral of anti-royal family feeling accelerates in 1915. One, when the Tsar takes control of the army, and two, when the Tsarina and Rasputin are now left alone in St. Petersburg and Moscow to run the country. All of this comes to a head in late 1916. We're almost done the lecture for today, folks, and then we're going to take a break, a pause, and I'm going to spin you off to watch the documentary and pick up where this story ends. 1916, a number of members of the royal family that have positions in the government are very concerned about the state of the war. They're very concerned about all the rumors and all the rumblings they're hearing about Rasputin and the Queen. And something's got to get done. The Tsarina will not hear one word against Rasputin. The Tsarina will not hear one word against her husband. Tsar Nicholas II will not hear any word. If he gets word from people that there are things going on, he says, well, what does my wife say? And what the wife says is, well, what does Rasputin say? Because he's her chief advisor. These guys are stymied. They can't do anything with Rasputin there holding all the reins of power over the Tsarina. So one of the princes and a bunch of the other nobles and so on decide only way forward is to kill Rasputin. They got to kill him, which will then open the door to maybe the Tsarina and the Tsar listening to them and making some sort of changes that will help to prevent the cataclysm they see coming with the collapse of the Russian army. There's no food. There's no weapons. It's bad, okay, at this point. Things are dire on the Eastern Front. What they do then is they reach out to Rasputin and they invite him to a secret meeting. And they say, listen, Raspy, keep this on the down low. We need to have a secret meeting. We want to talk to you about the war and stuff. So shh, don't tell anybody. Come to the meeting. So Rasputin, his ego, boosted by that, goes to this meeting. And here's the plan. It's a good plan. When Rasputin arrives, the guys are going to poison him. So he'll die. Now keep in mind, there's no CSI Moscow at this point in time. They can't do tests for all kinds of poisons and stuff. People just die all the time, right? So police work is pretty bad. So they're going to poison Rasputin. Nobody's going to be able to detect the poison in his system. What are they going to do, right? They're not going to call in David Caruso and the CSI crew and fix all this, right? So he's going to die. What they'll do then, because they're all nobles, they'll sneak his body back into the Winter Palace, tuck him into his bed. The next morning, what will happen is a maid or a servant will come in there, find Rasputin dead in his bed. Oh, maybe the guy had a heart attack. And all the princes and stuff will all sit there and they'll wear black and they'll go, oh, it's so tragic that he died, terribly tragic. But then they can now move on to the Tsarina and start solving the problems. It's a good plan. It's a good plan. So Rasputin shows up. And by the way, there are all kinds of rumors about his mystical powers, right? His ability to faith heal and, his occult and this and that. And there still are all kinds of rumors about that. These guys don't buy into that. He shows up. They say, hey, Raspy, thanks for coming, man. It's great. Good to see you. I'm glad we got somebody on the inside that can work with us here. Let's toast to our new relationship. Before we get down to the nitty gritty, before we work out the details, let's have a bit of a drink here and, toast our new partnership. So they give him a glass of wine. And in that wine is enough arsenic to kill 3 people. They've loaded that up with arsenic, which is like rat poison. Okay. I mean, this is lethal stuff. Rasputin takes it, cheers, chugs it back, dies, collapses on the ground. All the nobles are like, yay, the evil Rasputin is dead. So now what they can do is take the guy, plans clicking. Plan's clicking. They're going to take him back to the palace, dump him there. All right, good, good. Everybody chest bumps each other. You know, nice job. High tens, right? Gives a bit of an up down as they go. Well done. While they're sitting there congratulating themselves, Rasputin groans, rolls over, and tries to get up. And they're like, ah! One of the guys who's there takes a knife and just stabs Rasputin like 7 times. And Rasputin's like, and collapses again. And they're like, yay, the evil Rasputin is dead. But now they've got a problem. Because people don't usually just die of stab wounds of naturally in their beds. That doesn't happen. So now they got to figure out, well, how are they going to get rid of Rasputin? Because they can't put him back in the palace. Can't be a heart attack. So they go, all right, wait. Here's what we're going to do. All right, we're going to take a bunch of booze. We're going to dump the booze on him. So he's just all covered in booze. So it looks like he was out on a huge bender. We'll take his money purse away from him, and we'll dump his body in an alley in a seedy part of St. Petersburg near a brothel or near a bar. It'll look like he went out, got himself some prostitutes, got a little drunk, was working his way back home, got attacked by some cutthroats. They stabbed him. They stole his wallet. That'll work out fine. We'll go down. We'll hunt down a bunch of poor people. We'll hang them for the crime. Problem solved. All right, good. Everybody good? We're good with the new plan. Good with the new plan? Okay. High fives. Here we go. Well done. Well done. While they're all congratulating themselves on the new plan, Rasputin rolls over and starts to crawl his way out the door. The prince who's in charge of this is like, takes a gun, bang, 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 and shoots him 3 times, including once in the head. Yay, the evil Rasputin is dead. But now, okay, very rarely is someone going to get stabbed and shot during a robbery. That's just going to raise too many questions. Even for the police at that point in time, this is going to seem kind of sketchy. Clearly, somebody had it out for this guy. So now they're like, okay, forget it. We just got to dump the body. We got to get rid of the body. And then what will happen is he'll just go missing. We'll do a search for him. They won't be able to find him. We'll then go to the Tsarina and convince the Tsarina that maybe the guy bolted. You know, he's a bit of a jerk. Who knows where he went? Who cares? Let's move on from here. So they take his body, roll him up in a carpet, go down to the Neva River, and they dump him over the bridge into the river. Crashes through the ice, and they're hoping for the current to take the body out to the Gulf of Finland, and then it's gone. And they're all like, okay, let us never speak of this again. And they all wander off and go home. What they don't realize is that the current is running fairly slow, the ice is fairly thin, and the body is pushed up back through the ice, and the carpet snags on a low-hanging branch over top of the Neva River. The next morning, police officers walking down by the water, sees the carpet in the water, snagged on the branch. That's suspicious. Walks over, pulls the carpet open, sees the body of Rasputin. Immediately, the jig is up. Rasputin's been murdered. Tsarina goes into a state of mourning. Tsar Nicholas goes into a state of mourning. The Russian economy continues to collapse and spiral downwards. On a quick little side note, by the way, they do an autopsy of Rasputin because the Tsarina wants to know how he died. Maybe there's some clue they can figure out who killed him. And what they find with Rasputin is they find water in his lungs, which means that he didn't die from the arsenic, and he didn't die from the stabbings, and he didn't die from the bullet to the head. He drowned in that carpet because he couldn't get out of it. Like, what the? Anyway, now it's 1917, early 1917. Russian government's paralyzed. Rasputin's dead. Tsarina's in mourning. The Tsar doesn't know what to do because he's not getting any advice from anybody. The war is going so badly. The German offensive is ramping up again in 1917. And what happens is the Russian soldiers have finally had enough. They've been at war now for 3 years. They've got no food. They've got no shoes. They've got no guns. Their families are starving back at home. And they mutiny. They say, we are not fighting anymore. They throw down their guns, they start to leave, and they bolt. They leave the Eastern Front. The Germans are like, is this a trick? Are they just pulling back and then they're going to reattack? And so the Germans don't actually move at the very beginning of this, waiting to figure out what's going on. But it's not a trick. And Tsar Nicholas II is ordering all of his generals and all of his officers to get those men back in the trenches, get back to fighting. And all of the officers are like, we're not doing it. We're done. We're not doing it. We are not going to fight anymore until you're gone, your wife is gone, all this is done. Because this is a catastrophe for Russia of unparalleled proportions. Tsar Nicholas II tries to bolt, tries to get from the front back to St. Petersburg, where maybe he's got a power base, maybe where he can actually do something about all this. His train is stopped by angry soldiers. And right there on the rail side yard, Tsar Nicholas II is forced to sign his letters of abdication. He surrenders, says, I'm no longer the Tsar of Russia. Russia is now under the control of a provisional government. And that's it. The Romanov dynasty, which has been in power for 300 years, fizzles out with a whimper on the railroad siding in present-day Eastern Poland. Well, the provisional government that comes in is led by a guy named Alexander Kerensky. Alexander Kerensky will, after the Russian Revolution, go to the United States. He'll flee to the United States, end up becoming a professor of economics at Harvard. Intelligent guy, bourgeois. Alexander Kerensky is put in charge of the provisional government. Now, don't forget, the war is still happening because the Germans realize, okay, the Russians are in disarray. Let's get her going. And they ramp up their assault. What the people want, the Russian people, is they want the war over. The soldiers want the war over. That's why they got rid of the Tsar for. Kerensky's like, we can't make these decisions. Kerensky is very much like Abbé Sieyès in the 1790s. Where Sieyès, who creates the Constitution of 1791, says, nobody really elected me to be in charge, so we really shouldn't be part of the new government. We should have an election and let new people come in, which in 1792 leads to the Girondins and the Jacobins and Robespierre coming into power. Well, in hindsight, we can look back to that and go, Abbé, bad call. Bad call. Should have just stayed in power. They would have kept the Jacobins out, would have kept the Girondins out. Maybe that means there's no war. That's no Napoleon. That's no Great Terror, etc. Can't put the genie back in the bottle, though. That was their mistake. 1917, Alexander Kerensky is like, nobody really elected me. So I think we should have an election. And once we have an election, if the people vote for me, then we'll have a mandate, and then we can stop the war. Then we can make all kinds of changes. Not a bad idea. I mean, you got to give the guy, full marks for respect of democracy, but it's a bad call. Dude, you're in charge. End the war. Do something, right? You've been vested with power. Do something with that, but he doesn't. He decides we're going to hold an election. And the problem is that a lot of his friends who were political agitators have all vanished into the Russian gulag system. The Tsar, for years, arrested any potential political opponents, anybody who questioned the government, anybody who threatened the government, and they were sent off into the prison system in Siberia. So you've got common criminals up there, murderers, rapists, etc., as well as political dissidents that are up there. Well, Kerensky doesn't know where his friends are. He just knows they're somewhere in the gulag system. So what Alexander Kerensky does in the summer of 1917, the only piece of legislation passed by the provisional government is an immediate amnesty for any political prisoners arrested under the Tsar. Because he wants his friends back before the election so that his friends can all get elected and he can be in charge of this legitimate government. Well, that's great. All of his friends get released from prison. But so does Kamenev and Zinoviev and Molotov and Bukharin and Stalin and Lenin. They're all released out of prison. In fact, Lenin is in Belgium at this point in time. He's in exile in Belgium. But all the other Bolsheviks, all these other very radical, political, violent people, like Joseph Stalin's in prison for arson, bank robbery, and murder. He's not in there because he wrote a dissident tract about, the equal rights of man. He's there for a very legitimate reason, released. So all these guys come flooding out of the Gulag system in the fall of 1917, right into Moscow, right into St. Petersburg, right into Kursk, right into Kiev, and all these cities, which all become hotbeds of political agitation between the lefts and the rights, between the whites and the reds, between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, all these various groups of people. Taylor.
So, if he was in there for legitimate reasons, like all those crimes he committed, why did he get out for being a political prisoner?
Because on his docket, he was also there because he was all the crimes he was doing were as a bagman for the Bolsheviks. He was raising money for the Bolshevik Party. So attached to his jacket, attached to his police file, is the fact that he's a member of this Bolshevik political party. So they mistakenly say, well, he must have been here for political reasons as well as criminal reasons, and they release him.
Huh.
So Joseph Zhukashvili, as his real name is, who's now taken on the war name Stalin, which means man of steel, goes back, reunites himself with Bukharin and Molotov and Kamenev Zinoviev, and form the core of the Bolshevik Party, waiting for Lenin's return from Belgium. And when he comes back in 1917, in November 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution happens. The October Revolution happens. The Bolsheviks seize control of all the levers of power in St. Petersburg, overthrow the Provisional Government under Alexander Kerensky, and immediately declare a new communist state that is turning its back on the ways of the past and moving forward into their new communist utopia. And that's the Russian Revolution.
Is that Molotov? Molotov is in like Molotov cocktail. Is that who that's named after?
Yeah. So during the political battles and so on in the early 1900s, and then during the Russian Civil War, which happens between 1917 and 1921, Molotov, he doesn't create them, but these bottles of gasoline with a rag coming out of them, because Molotov had a bit of a fiery personality. He had a very explosive, violent temperament. They called these things that explode in fire Molotov cocktails. So.
Well, that's a fun person to let out of the gulag.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Bolsheviks they're a party. They're a party for sure. All right. Other questions? I mean, again, that's 20 years of history. A lot of moving pieces, sort of all brought down into we take one narrative thread, we pull that thread and follow that story through. But there's a lot of other things obviously going on. Any other questions? Any context you want for?
So what happened on the French side of the war?
Well, the war goes on. The war is going on until 1918, right? So the war doesn't end until
First World War.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So that war just continues, right? So on the Western Front, you've got all the battles that are happening that you guys learned about in grade 10. So the Battle of Vimy Ridge happens in 1917 in France. The Canadians are there. The Battle of Verdun's happening. So the Germans are fighting two concurrent wars, one on the Eastern Front and one 2,500 kilometers away on the Western Front. And it gives you a sense of the German industrial capacity, that Germany fights a war on two sides of one continent against every other major power. Austria doesn't do a whole lot during the war and nearly wins. And then not only nearly wins, but after being destroyed economically by the First World War, rebuilds itself in 20 years and nearly wins another major war against the entire continent 20 years later. So the German industrial capacity, the German economic capacity is unbelievable. Then and now, Germany is the engine that drives the European continent. Without Germany, there is no European Union. There is no European economy. Germany is the engine that drives all of Europe. Any other questions about those events?
I heard at one point that the powers that Bismarck got, like because he was the Chancellor of Germany.
Yeah.
And like he was kind of running the country, so he got the powers of Chancellor like expanded for him, so he could do more. That because Bismarck did that, that made it easier for the stuff Hitler later did because he was also chancellor?
Yes and no. Really what gives Hitler the powers that he has is the 1933 Enabling Act, which Bismarck, it's based on Bismarck's 4-year dictatorial degree that he brings in 1860 that Kaiser Wilhelm I signs off on. The role of chancellor actually is very limited, because you've got, and you have to understand too that the chancellorship that Bismarck had between 1870 and 1892 is under a king is very different than the chancellorship in a democracy under the president. So like the Weimar Republic that's created post World War I has a president and a chancellor. So the president is in charge of the nation, the chancellor is in charge of the government. So just like here in Canada, Justin Trudeau is not the head of the country. Justin Trudeau is the head of our government, right? The head of the country is who?
Queen Elizabeth?
Yeah, but who's her representative?
Governor General.
Governor General. So the Governor General is actually the head of our country. Justin Trudeau is just in charge of the government. So the Chancellor, to put those in parallels, the Chancellor is in charge of the government under the Weimar system, and the Reichspräsident is in charge of the country. So there's a dilution of the power of the Chancellor. The Chancellor can set agendas, the Chancellor can pass legislation and so on, but the President has to sign off on that. The President has veto power over the policies of the Bundesreich and so on. So the position of Chancellor that Hitler gets in 1933 is very different than the position of Bismarck. But in 1933, the Enabling Act is passed after the burning of the Reichstag in February of 1933. And the Enabling Act gives Hitler, as Chancellor, sweeping dictatorial powers to deal with this existential threat that is perceived to be occurring in 1933, communist uprising, et cetera, et cetera. And he uses the Enabling Act then to create Dachau and the concentration camp system. He uses the Enabling Act to empower the SS to be in charge of that. He uses the Enabling Act to create the Geheime Staatspolizei, the secret state police. So all the terror apparatus that he will then use to build his totalitarian regime, he gets from a piece of legislation that's not really the powers of the chancellor. It's granted to him in 33 for a limited period of time. When President Hindenburg dies in 34, then Hitler assumes the chancellorship and the presidency, combines them under the dual title of the Führer, or the leader of the country, and then uses that sweeping legislation, that power of the combined offices, to extend the Enabling Act indefinitely. So it's kind of similar to what Bismarck did in 1860, but you have to understand that Bismarck was given that power by the king. And then when the 4 years was up, Bismarck's powers were curtailed by the king. He went back to being a regular chancellor. He used those powers for 4 years to shape the German economy, to shape the German military, to shape German foreign policy the way he wanted it, set up German unification. But that power was always held firmly at the other end of that string by Kaiser Wilhelm I. Hitler's untethered from any other curtailing authority as of the Enabling Act in 1933. So it's kind of similar, but it's quite different, the two policies.
What happened to Wilhelm II?
When World War I ends, Wilhelm II is forced to abdicate. As part of the Treaty of Versailles, he loses, so the Hohenzollern dynasty comes to an end, started all the way back in the 1648, the Hohenzollerns become the electors of Brandenburg, and that then turns into the Kingdom of Prussia, which then turns into Germany. Kaiser Wilhelm II is sent into exile. He's not allowed to stay in Germany, so he goes and lives in, ironically enough, Belgium, the country that he invaded in 1914. And he spends the rest of his life in Belgium, living, he's got money and he's got, he doesn't have any power anymore, but he's not stripped of all of his family wealth. He's not stripped of all that stuff. So he lives in a state villa in Belgium. Still has social gatherings and hobnobs with wealthy elites and so on. Dies in 1940, after the German invasion of Belgium and Holland, after the phony war, as the German blitzkrieg then begins to rages across Western Europe and conquers Belgium and Holland and Denmark and Norway and France, Kaiser Wilhelm II dies then in 1940. Nothing nefarious, just dies of old age. But so yeah, spends the rest of his life in fairly sumptuous exile. Any other questions? Well, just tons of knowledge up here, tons of stuff. Can't remember to bring home bread, but I can remember all this stuff. Anyway, okay, here's the plan then, folks. This has been a bit longer than I wanted, but I hope it was entertaining enough for you and enlightening in certain ways. Go take yourselves a bit of a break, you know, get a stretch in, get a bit of a walk in. It's a nice day outside, not a cloud in the sky. Go for a jog, go for a walk, take your dog for a walk. Don't have a dog, go steal someone else's and take them for a walk. Don't steal, borrow. You know, then I'm going to post for you at 11 o'clock. I'm going to post a Google question that goes along with the documentary that will pick up on our story in 1917. So the Tsar abdicating on the railway side yard in 1917, and we're going to fast forward to 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then go back and try and trace what happened to the Russian royal family and the search for the remains of Russia's last Tsar. So I'm going to post that for you around 11. Documentary is about 45 minutes. It's broken up into 4 YouTube chunks, and they're all labeled part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. So just watch them in order. They're narrated by Jeremy Irons, who played Scar in The Lion King. That's pretty good. I would listen to that guy read a phone book. He's got a great voice. Watch the documentary, answer the Google question. After you've done that, which will be your attendance for this afternoon, answering the Google question, then you've got the remainder of the day to continue working on your assignments, okay? And we'll shake things up here a little bit. I will do a optional Google Meet today from 1 until 1:30. So I'm pushing it back. And the reason is that's going to give you time to watch the documentary, answer the question, then get your teeth sunk back into your assignments. At that point, you might think, oh yeah, I wanted to ask him this question about this assignment, or I wanted to run this by him and make sure it was okay. I'll be on optional Meet 1 until 1:30. I'll post that information for you so you don't forget. But that's it, folks. Off you go. Look for that Google question in about 35 minutes. Okay? Have a great day.